Have you ever been judged based on the way you look? What if the person you're laughing at was actually hiding an extraordinary secret? Well, this is the story of Emma Thompson, a humble waitress who was about to turn the tables in the most unexpected way. Emma Thompson had been working at the Ivory Lounge for years. It was one of the most exclusive restaurants in town, where the elite dined and the rich flaunted their wealth. Emma's appearance didn't scream wealth or sophistication. She was simple, wearing the standard black uniform with a white apron, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her hands constantly moving from one task to another. She had no intention of standing out. She just wanted to work and go home. That was until one fateful evening when the atmosphere in the restaurant changed in an instant. It all started with a group of wealthy patrons who were seated in the corner booth, sipping on their expensive wine and talking loudly about their recent vacations and business deals. As Emma approached their table to take their order, the conversation turned towards her. The leader of the group, a man named Gregory, smirked at her. "You work here?" he asked with a hint of mockery in his voice. Emma smiled politely. "Yes, sir. I do. I bet you couldn't even tell the difference between classical music and pop." He laughed, clearly expecting her to be flustered. Emma simply nodded, trying not to engage in the conversation. But Gregory wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "Why don't you show us what you know about music? Go play something on that piano over there. Let's see if you can handle something more than just delivering drinks." His friends chuckled, and Emma could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. She had been working in this environment long enough to know the unspoken rules: stay out of the way, don't make a scene, and, above all, never attract attention. But that night, something inside her stirred. Maybe it was the way they looked at her, as if she were nothing more than an object to ridicule. Maybe it was the challenge in Gregory's voice. Either way, Emma felt a shift within her. She walked over to the grand piano in the corner of the room, her heart racing with anticipation. The keys were just waiting for her touch, like an old friend greeting her after a long time apart. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the ivory keys, and began to play. It wasn't just a simple song, but a complex, beautiful piece that had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. The room fell silent. No one had expected this. Gregory and his friends stopped laughing, their smiles fading into stunned silence. Emma's fingers danced across the keys, each note flowing with a grace that seemed impossible coming from someone they had just mocked. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, each movement calculated and perfect. The music filled the air, washing over everyone in the room. For the first time that evening, there was no laughter, no mocking. Just the sound of Emma's fingers weaving through the melody. By the time she finished, there was no sound except for the soft echo of the last note ringing through the room. The patrons were still. Gregory's face had gone from smug to speechless. His friends exchanged looks, unsure of what to say. Emma stood up slowly, her heart still pounding in her chest. The applause came suddenly, from the other side of the room where a few guests had started to clap. It spread like wildfire until the whole restaurant was clapping, recognizing the quiet genius they had all overlooked. Gregory looked around, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment as the realization hit him. He had mocked the wrong person. Emma had proven them all wrong, and in doing so, she had changed the way everyone in that room saw her. The waitress who was nothing but a target of ridicule had become the hero of the night. And in that moment, Emma knew one thing for certain. She would never be underestimated again. The next day, Emma arrived at work earlier than usual. The restaurant was quiet, the morning sun streaming through the large windows, casting a soft glow on the tables and chairs. It was her usual routine, preparing for the lunch rush. But today felt different. The usual hum of the kitchen and the clinking of silverware couldn't drown out the memory of last night. She knew her performance had made an impression, but she hadn't expected the kind of reaction it had sparked. As she moved through the empty restaurant, cleaning the tables and adjusting the chairs, her thoughts drifted back to the moment when the music had filled the room and the stunned faces of the guests. She could still hear the applause in her mind. Her fingers had moved so effortlessly over the keys, and for that brief moment, she had felt like she was finally seen. But even more than that, it was the realization that she wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the waitress. She was someone with a story, with talent, with a place in the world. As the clock ticked closer to opening, Emma's confidence grew. She could feel the shift in the air. The energy in the restaurant seemed to vibrate differently, charged with the buzz of anticipation. The door opened, and the first wave of customers walked in. As always, they barely acknowledged her presence as they took their seats. Emma set her mind to her tasks, walking gracefully between tables, always polite, always composed. But this time, there was something different in the way she carried herself. She moved with purpose, her head held high, her steps more confident than ever. And then it happened. A familiar voice echoed across the room, cutting through the quiet chatter. Emma. Gregory, the man who had mocked her the night before, called out, his voice far too loud for the setting. She turned to face him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Yes, sir, she replied calmly, maintaining her composure. Gregory, sitting with a group of colleagues, gestured toward the piano. You know, he began, his tone oozing with a false casualness. I was thinking about what happened last night. You really surprised us. I didn't know a waitress like you could play like that. You might even be better than some of those so-called artists we've hired for our events. Emma couldn't help but notice the hint of embarrassment in his voice. He was trying to cover up his earlier mockery, but she could see through it. Thank you, Emma said softly, her voice steady. I'm glad you enjoyed it. But inside, she was smiling. Gregory had no idea how much his words meant. He had underestimated her, humiliated her in front of everyone. But now he was the one who was fumbling for words. As the conversation continued, Emma's thoughts shifted. She wasn't going to let this moment pass without something more. She had been given a chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. The idea of playing again had been lingering in the back of her mind since last night. But this time, it wasn't about proving something to anyone else. It was about owning her talent, claiming her space in the world. The rest of the day went by in a blur of orders, refills, and polite smiles. But in between it all, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was more. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now, as though they were seeing her for the first time. At the end of her shift, she went to the piano, the one spot in the restaurant that had once seemed like a distant dream. Her fingers brushed over the keys, just as they had the night before. It was time to play again. But this time, she wasn't doing it for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the music guide her. The sound filled the empty space of the restaurant, echoing against the walls. It was like a conversation with herself, a declaration of who she was. As the last note lingered in the air, she stood up and smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Emma had found her voice, and nothing, not even the judgment of a few wealthy patrons, could take that away. The following week, Emma's life seemed to take on a new rhythm. She still worked her usual shifts at the Ivory Lounge, but something had shifted within her. The energy around her felt different. The customers who had once ignored her now seemed to notice her, their eyes lingering a bit longer, perhaps realizing there was more to her than they had assumed. She had no intention of showing off her talents to anyone, but it was impossible to ignore the small shift that had begun. One afternoon, during a quieter part of her shift, Emma was clearing a table when Gregory approached her again. He had a more genuine look on his face this time, not the smug arrogance that had colored his earlier interactions. Emma, I wanted to apologize for what I said last week, he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I didn't mean to come off as condescending. I was just, I don't know, caught up in the moment. It wasn't right, and I realize now that I completely underestimated you. Emma paused, her eyes meeting his. The apology was unexpected, and though she wasn't looking for an apology from him, she appreciated the sincerity in his words. It's okay, she replied quietly. I understand. Gregory smiled, clearly relieved. I know I can't make up for it, but I wanted to say thank you. You played beautifully. I've never seen anything like that before. It was like a hidden gem. I don't think I'll ever look at people the same way again. His words hung in the air, and for the first time since she had met him, Emma could see the man in front of her was genuinely moved by what had happened. Emma nodded, not sure how to respond, but appreciating the respect he was now showing her. Thank you, she said again, this time with a small smile of her own. As Gregory walked back to his table, Emma felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The validation wasn't necessary for her to feel complete, but it was a reminder that sometimes the world's opinions could change in an instant. That night, As Emma returned to her piano after her shift, the familiar weight of the keys felt comforting. She had made peace with her place in the world. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone anymore. It was about embracing who she was, talents and all. The music flowed from her fingertips like a conversation between her and the universe, a gentle, confident assertion that she had every right to exist as she was. The following days brought more subtle changes. Emma's interactions with the regulars at the restaurant felt more genuine. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had earned her place, not through status or appearance, but through her quiet strength. Gregory, who had once looked down on her, had even started asking her about her musical interests and shared his thoughts about art and music. Emma had to admit, she was surprised by the shift in his behavior, but it only reinforced her belief that people were capable of change when they were willing to confront their own biases. One evening, a customer approached her while she was taking an order. He was an older man, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice friendly. "I couldn't help but overhear some of the talk about you. You played at the piano last week, didn't you?" Emma nodded, a little taken aback by the recognition. "Yes, I did." "Well, I just wanted to say you were amazing," he said. "I've been coming to this restaurant for years, and I've never seen anyone quite like you. You've got something special, and I hope you don't let that go unnoticed." The man's words were simple, but they meant more to her than he could ever know. She smiled at him, genuinely grateful for his kindness. As the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself growing in ways she had never imagined. She still had her quiet moments, her time at the piano, but now she held her head higher. She no longer hid in the shadows, content with being overlooked. She had a presence, and it was one that was impossible to ignore. Her life wasn't about becoming famous or being seen by everyone. It was about accepting herself, her talents, and embracing the beauty of quiet confidence. And in that quiet confidence, Emma had found something far more valuable than anything money or status could offer. She had found her place in the world, not as a waitress, but as a woman who had earned her right to be heard. As the weeks passed, Emma's life in the restaurant continued with a quiet confidence that no one could ignore. She was no longer the invisible waitress. Her presence was now a quiet but undeniable force. She had stopped hiding in the background, no longer afraid to take her place in the world. Her interactions with customers had changed. They now treated her with respect, though some of them still underestimated her. But Emma no longer minded. She had learned to walk through life with her head held high, to own her own space. One evening, as she was walking through the restaurant on her break, she noticed a couple sitting at a corner table, their attention focused on her. They looked familiar, but Emma couldn't quite place them. The man waved her over. "Excuse me, miss," he called, his voice warm and inviting. Emma walked over, a polite smile on her face. "Yes, sir." The couple exchanged a glance before the man spoke again. "I just wanted to say that we were here the night you played the piano," he said. "I think it's safe to say that you left an impression. You really have an incredible talent." Emma's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't often that someone approached her with such genuine admiration. She tried to hide her surprise behind a polite smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "It was just something I love to do." "I'm not sure if you know this," the man continued, "but my wife and I have a small concert hall downtown. We usually host classical music performances, but we've been looking for someone with your unique touch. Would you consider playing for us one night?" Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected such an offer, especially from strangers. But the look in their eyes told her that they weren't joking. They truly saw something in her. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," she replied, her voice uncertain. "I've only played in small settings, and I don't really perform professionally." "I understand," the woman chimed in, smiling gently. "But you have something special. We'd be honored to have you perform for our guests. No pressure, of course. Just think about it." Emma stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The offer was tempting, but it felt like stepping into the unknown. She had spent so many years hiding her talent, using it only for her own comfort, that the idea of performing in front of an audience made her feel vulnerable. But then she thought about everything that had led her here, the judgment she had endured, the mockery, and the sudden recognition that had changed everything. Perhaps this was the next step. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice more confident than she had expected. "I'll think about it." The couple smiled at her, clearly pleased with her response. "Take your time," the man said. "We'll be here whenever you're ready." As Emma walked away, a swirl of emotions filled her chest. She had just been offered an opportunity, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the fear that had always held her back. She felt a quiet excitement, a flicker of something bigger than herself, something she had never dared to dream of before. That night, as she sat at the piano after her shift, her fingers hovered over the keys. The decision weighed on her, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She played, not for anyone else, but for herself. The music filled the space around her, the melody carrying her thoughts away from the uncertainty of the future. She didn't know what would come of this new opportunity, but she was ready to take the leap. The next day, Emma returned to the concert hall to meet with the couple. They gave her a warm welcome and showed her the venue, a small but elegant space that felt both intimate and grand. The thought of performing in such a setting was intimidating, but Emma was determined. She couldn't hide her talent any longer. She would do this, not for the validation, but because it was what she had always wanted to do. The night of her performance, Emma stood backstage, feeling the familiar nerves in her stomach. But this time, there was something different. She wasn't afraid of failing. She was afraid of not giving her best. The moment she stepped onto the stage, the soft glow of the spotlight felt like a new beginning. As her fingers touched the keys, the room fell silent. The music was her voice, and with each note, she spoke to the audience in a language they all understood. The applause that followed was louder than she had ever imagined. And for the first time, Emma realized that she was no longer just the waitress. She was the one who had the power to change everything. The days that followed Emma's performance were a blur of excitement and anticipation. The offer from the couple at the concert hall had become a turning point in her life. She was no longer just the waitress at the Ivory Lounge. She had stepped into a new chapter. The music had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Now, it was up to her to decide how far she would let it take her. Emma had always been content with the simplicity of her life, working quietly in the background, serving customers with a smile and a kind word. But now, she found herself thinking about the future in a way she never had before. The idea of performing, of sharing her music with the world, was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality within her grasp. One evening, as she walked into the restaurant, she noticed a familiar face sitting at a table near the window. It was Gregory again, the man who had once mocked her but had since become an unexpected supporter. He waved her over, and as she approached, he smiled. "Emma, I just wanted to say how impressed I was with your performance," he said. "I've been talking to a few people in the local music scene, and there's real potential for you. People are talking about you." Emma felt a surge of both pride and disbelief. She had never imagined this kind of attention. "Thank you," she said softly, trying to keep her composure. "But it's all still so new to me. I don't even know where to start." Gregory leaned forward, his voice earnest. "You've got talent, Emma. Don't let it go to waste. I think it's time you take this seriously. You could have a career in music if you wanted it." The words hit her harder than she expected. A career in music? The thought had always seemed so far-fetched, something that only happened to people with connections or a background in the industry. But here was Gregory, someone who had once dismissed her, now offering advice and encouragement. "I appreciate your faith in me," Emma replied, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." Gregory smiled, understanding her hesitation. "You don't have to dive in head first. Just take small steps. Start by performing more, in smaller venues, and see where it takes you. You've already made an impact. Just keep pushing forward." As Emma left work that night, her mind was racing. She had always been content with her quiet life, but now the idea of stepping into the spotlight, of sharing her music with more people, seemed less daunting. It felt like the next logical step. The next morning, Emma sat down at the piano again, her fingers gently tapping out a familiar melody. She closed her eyes and let the music take over, letting her thoughts drift away. This time, it wasn't just about proving herself, it was about following her passion. Music had always been her escape, the one thing that had given her solace in moments of doubt. Now, it was becoming her future. Weeks passed, and Emma began to perform more frequently. She started small, playing at local cafes and private events, where the pressure was low and the audience was smaller. But each performance built her confidence, and soon, she was playing to larger crowds. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People loved her sound, her style, and the way she made each note feel like it carried an emotion. Emma had found her place in the world, not just as a waitress, but as a musician, someone who could touch others with her gift. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, Emma was approached by a well-dressed man who introduced himself as the manager of a prestigious music label. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Your performance tonight was outstanding. Have you ever considered recording an album?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. The offer was surreal, like something out of a dream. "I've always thought about it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I never thought it was something I could actually pursue." The manager smiled, extending his business card. "I think you've got what it takes. Let's talk. I'd love to help you make this happen." Emma stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She had come so far, from the quiet waitress who played in the background to a woman with the potential to make her dreams come true. As she looked at the card in her hand, she realized that the future she had once dreamed of was now within her reach. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but Emma was ready. She was ready to take the leap into the world of music, to finally share her gift with the world, and to step into the life she had always dreamed of. Emma Thompson, the quiet waitress who had once been invisible, was now a force to be reckoned with. And nothing could stop her now. As the months passed, Emma found herself standing on the edge of a new life. Her performances had become more frequent, and with each passing day, she gained more recognition. The small, intimate gigs had evolved into full-scale performances at renowned venues. Her name was beginning to circulate in the local music scene, and even larger music labels started to take notice. Emma's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. She had gone from being the quiet waitress to a rising star in the world of music, all because of one decision to embrace her talent. The shift was gradual, yet undeniable. She had begun to record her first album, working with a producer who believed in her vision. The process was both exhilarating and terrifying, but Emma embraced every moment of it. She poured her heart into every song, drawing from her experiences, her struggles, and the quiet moments she had spent alone at the piano. There were moments when she questioned herself, wondering if she truly belonged in this new world she had stepped into. But each time doubt crept in, she would remember the person she had once been, the woman who had spent so many years hiding her true self. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. One evening, after a particularly intense recording session, Emma stood in the studio, staring at the sheet music spread out before her. The melody was flowing, the notes coming together in a way that felt like magic. It was a song she had written about resilience, about overcoming obstacles, about embracing the challenges life threw her way. As she played the final chord, she sat back, a feeling of satisfaction washing over her. She had created something beautiful, something that came from deep within her soul. Later that week, Emma received an invitation to perform at a prestigious music festival. The offer was overwhelming. It was the kind of opportunity most musicians only dream of. The festival would bring together some of the most talented artists from around the world, and Emma had been chosen to perform. She was proud. She realized that the woman who had once been invisible had now become a force to be reckoned with, and she was ready for whatever came next. As Emma's career began to soar, she found herself traveling more often than ever before. The once familiar world of the Ivory Lounge was now a distant memory, replaced by bustling airports, sound checks, and packed concert halls. It was a life she had dreamed of but never truly believed would be hers. Yet, here she was, living it. Each new performance, each new city, brought with it a fresh sense of excitement. The fans, the applause, the recognition, it was all overwhelming at times. But amidst it all, Emma never lost sight of why she had started this journey in the first place. She had always wanted to share her music with the world, to express herself in a way that went beyond the quiet moments at the piano in the corner of the restaurant. Now, she was doing that, and it felt incredible. One evening, as she prepared for yet another performance, Emma took a quiet moment to reflect. She sat in her dressing room, her fingers brushing over the familiar keys of her piano, which had been set up in the corner of the room for her practice. The lights outside her window were twinkling as the city came alive, but in that moment, everything was still. It was just her and the music. She thought back to the early days, when she had worked so hard to stay invisible, to blend into the background. She had spent years trying to hide from the world, from her own talents, from the fear that someone might finally see her for who she really was. But now, she was standing in front of thousands of people, sharing her music with the world, and she felt nothing but gratitude. Grateful for every step that had led her to this point, for every challenge she had overcome, and for every person who had believed in her. The music had always been her refuge, her escape, but now it was her voice. It was how she communicated with the world, how she touched the hearts of those who listened. And the more she played, the more she realized that she was no longer just playing for herself. She was playing for everyone who had ever doubted her, for the ones who had looked at her and seen nothing more than a waitress. She was playing for every person who had ever felt small, overlooked, or unheard. And with every note, she was proving that there was so much more to her than anyone had ever realized. As the night of the performance approached, Emma took a deep breath and stood up from the piano. It was time. She could feel the familiar nerves, the flutter of excitement in her chest, but she also felt something else. Confidence. She knew this was where she was meant to be. This was her moment. When she stepped onto the stage, the roar of the crowd was deafening, but she didn't flinch. She smiled, took her seat at the piano, and began to play. The music flowed from her fingers, each note a testament to everything she had overcome. The crowd was mesmerized, their eyes fixed on her as she played with a passion and intensity that could not be ignored. For Emma, it was no longer just about the performance. It was about sharing her soul with the world. When the final note rang out, the silence in the room was deafening. And then, the applause erupted. It was louder than anything Emma had ever experienced. And in that moment, she knew she had found her place. This was her life now. This was who she was meant to be. The recognition from the crowd, the cheers, the standing ovation. It was all incredible, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that Emma had finally embraced her true self. She had stopped hiding and had stepped into the spotlight, not to seek validation, but to share the gift she had been given. And as she walked off the stage that night, her heart was full. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Emma felt ready for whatever came next. As Emma's career continued to grow, the opportunities seemed endless. The music world that once felt so distant now felt like home. She had been performing at prestigious venues, receiving offers from some of the biggest names in the industry, but despite the whirlwind of excitement, Emma remained grounded. She hadn't forgotten the quiet moments she spent playing at the Ivory Lounge, and it was these memories that kept her connected to her roots. It was a Saturday afternoon when Emma found herself in a small recording studio, preparing for another project. Her new album was well on its way, and the pressure to deliver something even better than before was starting to weigh on her. The excitement of her earlier performances had faded into the routine of studio life. Long hours, repeated takes, and the relentless drive to perfect every note. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys as she thought about the next song. It was a difficult piece, one that had taken her weeks to write, but Emma knew it was the song that would define this album. It was about the struggle to find one's voice, to embrace who you are in a world that constantly tells you who you should be. It was a song born from her own journey, from the moments of doubt and fear to the triumph of standing on that stage and feeling truly seen for the first time. She had already recorded the basic tracks, but something was missing. The emotion, the rawness, wasn't quite there. Emma knew it was time to dig deeper, to find that connection with the music that had always been her strength. As the producer made a few adjustments to the sound equipment, Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the room envelop her. She thought about everything that had led her to this point, the long nights at the piano, the endless hours spent perfecting her craft, the ridicule she had once faced, and the validation she had found in her own music. She had come so far from that quiet waitress in the corner of the Ivory Lounge, and yet, in many ways, she was still that same person. The person who had always believed in the power of music to change lives, to heal, and to speak when words failed. With a deep breath, Emma began to play. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear. She played with everything she had, her heart, her soul, her passion. The sound of the piano filled the room, and Emma could feel the music resonating in every part of her being. It was as though the song was no longer just a piece of music. It was her story, her voice, her truth. When the final note rang out, Emma opened her eyes and looked around the room. The producer, who had been sitting quietly behind the control panel, was staring at her, his expression one of pure awe. "That's it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "That's the magic." Emma smiled softly, feeling a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't felt in a long time. The song was finally complete, and it was everything she had hoped it would be. As the recording session wrapped up, Emma stepped out of the studio and into the cool evening air. She walked down the street, the city lights twinkling in the distance, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over her. She had found her place, not just in the music industry, but in the world. She had embraced her talent, her voice, and her story, and now she was ready to share it with the world. But even as the future seemed brighter than ever, Emma knew there would always be challenges ahead. The road to success was never easy, and there would be moments of doubt, of struggle. But those were the moments that had shaped her, that had made her who she was today. And as she stood on the threshold of something new, Emma realized that the journey was far from over. It had only just begun. Months passed, and Emma's life became a whirlwind of rehearsals, recordings, and performances. Her album had been released, and it was doing well, gaining attention from music lovers and critics alike. What had started as a small spark in a dimly lit corner of the Ivory Lounge had now turned into a full-fledged flame, lighting her way through the world of music. Emma had become not just a performer, but an artist whose voice and music resonated with people from all walks of life. Yet, despite the success and recognition, Emma remained as grounded as ever. The fame didn't change her. It only added layers to her story, making her more determined to keep creating, to keep sharing. The journey had taken unexpected turns, and each one had brought new challenges and triumphs. One afternoon, as she sat in a quiet cafe between performances, Emma received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar. It was the manager from the prestigious music festival who had invited her to perform months ago. "Emma," he said, "I've got some exciting news. We've been in talks with a major international label, and they're interested in signing you. They want to meet you and discuss a potential global tour." Emma felt a surge of disbelief. This was what every artist dreamed of, the chance to perform on a global stage, to reach fans around the world. But despite the excitement, a small voice in her head asked, was she ready for this? She had already achieved so much. Hadn't she been living the dream? She wasn't sure if she was prepared for the next big step, the weight of a global tour, the pressure that would come with it. Yet, deep down, Emma knew she couldn't turn down the opportunity. This was the next chapter, the next level. The same passion that had driven her to play in that small restaurant all those years ago was now propelling her forward. As she set the phone down, Emma felt a sense of purpose fill her chest. She had come so far, and there was so much more to accomplish. But no matter where her journey took her, she knew she would always remain true to herself and the music that had carried her this far. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, contract discussions, and rehearsals. The excitement was palpable, but so were the nerves. Emma's life had changed in ways she had never imagined, and she found herself standing at the precipice of something even bigger. As she prepared for her first international show, she thought back to the early days, the nights spent alone at the piano, the days spent serving customers who had no idea who she really was, and the moment she decided to take that leap and share her gift with the world. She had come so far since then. Now, as the lights of the first international stage dimmed and the music began, Emma knew she had finally found her place. Not just as a musician, but as a woman who had fought to be heard, who had fought to be seen. She had never imagined that this path would take her to places like this, but here she was, in front of thousands of fans, living her dream. And as the music poured from her, Emma felt the power of everything she had been through, the struggle, the doubt, the moments of triumph, all come together in this one moment. She wasn't just playing music, she was telling her story. She wasn't just performing, she was living her truth. As the last note of the song lingered in the air and the crowd erupted into applause, Emma knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning.